Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, warshippers of all ages, welcome to YouTube. My name is SeaRaptor. It's time for a first look. It's been a while. I've really gotten out of the habit of doing these because Wargaming has gotten to this really irritating habit of not giving us all of the test ships for a new branch at once, right? They give us the odd ones or the even ones, or you get half the top half of the line and the bottom half of the line. I have a very kind of cultivated way that I like to do this, right? I like to start at the bottom of the line. Let's say we're going to get the whole line. Let's do the 5, 6, 7, 8 going up, right? And they've gotten to where they've jumbled up the releases of these ships so much, it's made it really irritating to try to figure out how to pull this off. So, I apologize that we're a little behind. However, today we're finally going to get back into this with this ship here. This is Tier VIII American Battleship USS Nebraska. This thing is hideous, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know what else to say here. I mean, look at this thing. It is, well, it's obviously a hybrid, right? If you haven't been paying attention, and maybe if you're new to the game or you've been living under a rock for a while, Wargaming has slowly been introducing hybrid ships into World of Warships. Specifically, at the moment, there are 3 of these ships in the game. That is Tier VI Japanese Premium Battleship Issei, Tier VIII Premium Japanese Heavy Cruiser Tone, and then Tier 9 Premium American Battleship USS Kearsarge. And now we're going to be getting a tech tree line of ships that will kind of evoke the memory, feel similar to Kearsarge. Now, Kearsarge is a Tier 9 Premium, currently available, by the way, if you're keen to spend money, and I won't recommend the ship, because she's not for everybody, but she's currently available as part of the Black Friday things that's going on right now. So you can get a Kearsarge B, if you're curious. But Kearsarge is the first kind of high-tier battleship to mesh proper battleship guns with a decent airstrike. Now the Japanese, let's talk about kind of some things you're going to notice as we go through the line. The 2 Japanese premium hybrid ships, that's Tone and Issei, both of their squadrons drop torpedo planes. They only have the one bomber squadron, right? These aren't like an aircraft carrier where you have multiple choices, right? There's just the one squadron. That's all you get. Okay. Kearsarge mounts, I think she mounts F-8F Bearcats, but she basically gets access. Her squadron is rocket planes. Okay, so she gets and they're the big rockets, the American Tiny Tims. Okay, not the HFARs. The tech tree branch, which we're starting with Nebraska here, we'll move on to Delaware and Louisiana over the course of the rest of the week. We'll do first look videos on those. These get the American HE bombs, right? So this is arguably better, significantly better than the other 2 options. Now, there are some drawbacks to these versus the big HE bombs you get on Lexington and Midway, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But the American HE bombs are among the better armaments that the American aircraft carrier line fields, and now we're kind of merging them in here with the battleship line. So I'm a little leery of this, if I'm honest, from a balance perspective, right? American battleship guns are already pretty solid, right? They're not the best, but they're far from the worst. And now we're taking one of the best armaments out of the American aircraft carrier line, we're marrying it to the battleship line, and then we're going to let several, 2 of these div up with an American aircraft carrier. I'm starting to get a little nervous here. So let's talk about the ship, and then we'll see how things go. All right, so starting at the top, like we always do, let's talk about survivability here for USS Nebraska. 71,100 hit points. Not best in tier, because, Flandra, whatever, bizarrely, is still out there, but it is very healthy. This is a very healthy Tier 8 battleship. Now, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about this ship, comparing her to USS North Carolina and USS Kansas, which are going to be her tech tree cousins, right? The other 2 ships in the American tech tree at this tier. She does have more health than them. Her armor scheme, and we'll talk about this more in a minute, is going to be a little more reminiscent of North Carolina. As near as I can figure, this is more or less a North Carolina hull, or at least very similar to it. You can tell it doesn't quite have that telltale taper. It tapers, but not the Iowa bows have a bit more of a turn to them. This ship doesn't quite have that. So my gut read is that based on the armor scheme and what I'm looking at, this ship is largely based on the hull of USS North Carolina. 23% torpedo protection is, well, it's pretty typical of what I would expect for an American battleship in this tier. It's a little better. The North Carolina's 19%, but it certainly isn't going to run away with any awards. Amagi at 43, and Massachusetts and Alabama, of course, the American South Dakota class ships at 49%, running away with this category. Flandre also 44%. So there's plenty of really good torpedo protection if you want a Tier 8 battleship that's got it. This ship ain't that. So don't look elsewhere if that's what you're after. So let's talk about our armor layout, okay? So we're seeing here, you can see the 305mm belt. This is basically the same belt that you're going to find on North Carolina. She is 32mm here on the flight deck and all of her extremities. This means that she will take a lot of full pins from incoming heavy cruiser fire. Japanese heavy cruisers, British heavy cruisers, German heavy cruisers will pin more than this, but like the typical Tier 8 heavy cruiser that will fire HE at you, French, Japanese, British, Russians don't have any heavy cruisers at this tier. Those kinds of things, right? They'll all pin this 32mm without problem. No concern. So you will take full pins, you will burn, it will not feel good. Beyond that, it's... Yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot to talk about. We can look at her Citadel real briefly, but dear God, you should not be brawling with this ship. If you are brawling with this ship, it feels to me like you have screwed up by the numbers. Let's see, let's get rid of her casemate armor as well. So here's the Citadel. It is, as you can see, quite low in the water, well below the waterline, if I'm honest. So citadeling this ship should be very, very difficult, at least at close range. If you're able to plunge something through... at longer ranges, this is not. Yeah, this is casemate armor, guys. So this little wafer here, and all of this is really literally her Citadel. So my assumption then is that from a tanky perspective, she's going to eat a lot of damage in the soft bits, right? The upper works, the superstructure. Obviously, she has a ton of superstructure here, but citadeling this ship is not going to be easy. So if you find yourself in a brawl with this ship, maybe you can pull it off. But the other battleship secondaries are going to be chewing you up. You're going to take a lot of fire and secondary damage. You have all kinds of things that those secondaries are probably going to pin. Maneuverability and concealment. Now, this is where she does deviate a bit from North Carolina, right? North Carolina tops out at 27.5 knots. You see here Nebraska, 30 knots. The Americans, I think, were among the only nations that really kind of took this concept farther because they were among the only nations that actually built battleships at these tonnages, at these sizes of 30-plus knots. Which is, you have to remember, guys, we're in an era where catapults are not really a thing. So if you're going to launch aircraft off a deck, you have to get up all the speed you can muster, turn into the wind, and hope that 30, 40, 45 knots blowing across your deck will help get these planes enough lift to get off the ground. So I think one of the reasons you probably won't see many high-tier battleships from other nations attempting this is that the Americans, based on what I've read and what I know about naval history, which admittedly there's gaps, but just they were some of the only people to build ships in this weight class of this speed. So knowing they could do it, this sort of thing, this concept became feasible. So 30 knots, 760 on the turning circle, 16.2 on the rudder shift. Rudder shift is pretty average for the tier. Turning circle, on the other hand, is actually a little on the low side. She ought to handle pretty decently. So if you do find yourself in a brawl or dodging torpedoes, that's not too shabby. She does basically have the same handling characteristics as North Carolina. Her rudder response is a little better. Actually, is it the same? No, it's exactly the same. Look at that. I had to check it. No, it's not the same. I'm sorry. Her detection's the same. That makes sense. Her rudder shift is a little better. Turning circle is the same. There we go. Detectability, 15.2 on the surface, 11.2 by air. Full stealth rig gets her down to 12.3 on the surface. That is the same as USS North Carolina. So, again, if you're looking for a ship to kind of, get a feel for how the hull is going to behave, how the hull is going to handle, hey, her analog is already in the game. The armor scheme, the handling, the speed, not quite in analog, but certainly just in terms of positioning the ship and how it's going to fight, North Carolina's out there, and she's been in the game a very long time. You probably own one. You probably got a good sense of how the hull is going to handle. And as we move on to guns, you're going to see even some more familiarities, right? Nebraska's main battery is comprised of these 6 forward-facing, that's all she has, these 16-inch, 406mm, 45 caliber guns. These are the exact same caliber guns, exact same guns, barrels, and turrets that you will find aboard USS North Carolina over in the tech tree. In fact, it's even the same guns you'll find aboard USS Kansas in the tech tree. So all Tier 8 American battleships basically using the same turrets, the same guns. Now, Nebraska, by the virtue of the fact she only has 6 barrels, she does get a 27-second reload. So that is a little better. Better than her contemporaries. The downside is she just doesn't throw as many shells. So that's not a great feeling, right? But it does mean that she's throwing those shells a little quicker, and they're going to go where you aim them, right? So this is where the ship kind of gets this weird marriage of both North Carolina and Kansas, all right? North Carolina has the better Sigma of the two. She is a 2.0 Sigma. Kansas has less range and a worse dispersion ellipse. 22.7 kilometers on the range there, and a 287-meter dispersion ellipse. So literally, Nebraska's main battery takes the range and the dispersion ellipse of USS Kansas, and marries it to the Sigma of USS North Carolina. So if you like Kansas's guns, but you wish they were more consistent, ladies and gentlemen, USS Nebraska. She does fire significantly faster than Kansas, so she's got that going for her as well. So the guns, I think, are going to feel pretty good. I mean, North Carolina's Sigma is one of the better things about the ship. Now, one of the tricks you learn to deal with North Carolina is the shell drag. You see there, those AP shells coming out of the barrel at 701 meters per second. They are far from the fastest AP shells in this tier. And it means that when they get to the other end of that flight time, that other end of where they're going, they take forever to fall back to the earth. However, again, I come back to, though, you can practice, right? If you want to get used to how these guns are going to perform, you only have to take out your North Carolina or your Kansas and get used to how that shell lead works. No big deal. Secondary battery, well, she does have quite a few of the ubiquitous American 5-inch 38. She's got, looks like 3 kind of low down here forward of her bridge superstructure, and then 2 kind of tucked in here on the aft side. Those secondaries do have the standard 6.6 kilometer range. Remember, secondary range on battleships now standardized by tier, unless you're German, I think. I think Germans get a little bonus there. But 6.6 kilometers, so you could theoretically try a full secondary build here. But I don't think brawling is where you want to be with this ship, not with the planes. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. Speaking of planes, before we get to the Airstrike, let's talk about her AA defense. This is another place that you're going to find some similarities between her and North Carolina, but there are some differences, all right? So, for starters, we're putting up 8 flak puffs at 5.8 kilometers. That does put her in the exact same category as USS North Carolina. So, basically the same long-range battery here. Continuous damage. This number is quite a bit lower. Now, it's going to fool you a bit, right? If you add up all the numbers and you look at just the pure raw DPS, comparing her to North Carolina seems pretty favorable. And at a long-range DPS, that remains true, right? 175 DPS in the outer bubble is basically the same as North Carolina. Where Nebraska falls apart is the middle ring. You might notice, by looking over the ship, she just doesn't have as much flat deck surface area to squeeze in those American Bofors that they love so much, right? She's got she's got a few of these quad bins around, right? Looks like she's got 3 here around the flight decks, amidships on the port side. She's going to have some up forward. Yep, she's got 1 up forward. She's going to have 3 going down the other side of the, right? So the bottom line is she's got 1, 3 on each side, the 1 forward, and probably 2 back aft. Yeah, 2 tucked back aft here underneath the overhang of the flight deck. So she just doesn't have the mid-range punch, and you see that there. 235 mid-range aura is really not good. In fact, that's not quite worse in tier, but it's pretty close. There are a handful of ships like Flandre, like Gascogne, like Bismarck that exist that have a worse mid-range aura here at Tier 8 that keep her from running away with that crown. But for an American battleship mid-range, this is terrible. This is terrible. What the designers apparently tried to do, though, was make up for it in the short range because she mounts an obscene number of these double-barreled 20mm Oerlikons. So her short-range war is incredibly punishing. You see there, 459. That is not... is that good? Is that best in tier? That is best in tier. Oh, wow. Yeah, it's best in tier by a noteworthy margin. So most of Nebraska's AA punches in her short-range war. That means that if as a carrier player, if you're attacking this ship with rockets and or torpedoes or skip bombs, you're probably going to have pretty easy time of it. If you're attacking it with dive bombs, you're going to pay a price, right? Because you got to get right over the hull to get those dive bombs to connect, and you're going to spend a notable amount of time in the most punishing short-range AA aura of any Tier VIII battleship. But overall, AA defense, not really the ship's strong suit. On the other end of the planes, she does, of course, have these planes on her deck. Nebraska's Airstrike, her aircraft, I say Airstrike. The Airstrike listed here is actually, this is her depth charges, right? So for dealing with submarines. So don't get confused. Her aircraft, let's say, she mounts a squadron of 5 Curtiss SB-2C Helldivers. These are the same dive bombers you find aboard Tier VIII American carrier USS Lexington. Okay, so the plane health is pretty comparable. The speed, the handling, all that stuff. If you have a Lexington, you've driven these planes, you know what you're getting into. What are the differences? The differences in the armament. Lexington's bombs are different. You see there, Nebraska mounts the AN-M64 high-explosive bombs. Each plane drops 2 of them for 7,300 damage, 42 mils of penetration, and 46% fire chance. Now, if you're an opposing cruiser or destroyer, you really don't like those numbers, and you really don't want to see these things. However, if you're an opposing battleship, depending on the battleship you're driving, you might not care as much. And the reason for that is these bombs are basically like very similar to the Tier IV American high-explosive bombs. These are the same bombs, almost, that you find aboard Tier IV American carrier USS Langley. The bombs that Lexington drops are AN-M65s, so they have a higher alpha damage, about 10 millimeters more penetration, and about 10% more fire chance. So the bombs that Lexington drops hit harder. She individually drops fewer of them, right? So a Lexington drop is 3 planes with 2 bombs each for a total of 6 bombs, an alpha damage of about 55,000. Of course, Nebraska here is putting up 5 planes, assuming they all survive to drop, 2 bombs apiece 7,300 damage each for about a 73,000 alpha strike. Now, that's alpha's not going to last, right? Because as high explosive ammunition, these bombs, well, I won't say they can't Citadel you, but like, unless you drop them on a Ranger, you're probably not going to Citadel something and get that full damage. You're going to get full pins and a very high chance of fires. Now, the cooldown on those planes, let's see if we can figure this out. 120 seconds there. So 2 minutes. Every 2 minutes, you can launch one of these off your deck. And just like Kearsarge, when you launch the planes, that's when the countdown timer starts up again. So you have the opportunity to launch the planes, fly them around a bit, drop them, and it's very possible by the time you're done with those planes, the next wave of them on your deck is ready to go. The trick, of course, is balancing the usefulness of the dive bombers between the usefulness of your main battery, which of course is going to hit much harder than these dive bombers will against most targets. If you're hunting down a destroyer, it's the late game, then yeah, the planes are a good gig. But if there's still opposing cruisers or battleships in the game, your main battery has the chances, should be more impactful than these bombs will. Again, depends on the target. So that 42 millimeters of penetration is something you need to pay attention to, especially if you're going to use these against opposing battleships. You need to know that, dropping them on the French, most British targets, those kinds of things will probably get you good results. Dropping them on the deck of a Japanese battleship, certainly a Musashi or a Yamato, a higher tier battleship, not so impactful. Certainly the Russians will laugh at you. Most of those ships have 50 millimeters or more of deck armor, and they're just going to go, your stuff shatters, we don't care. They'll probably take some fires, but they won't take significant damage from the bomb strike itself. So yeah, let's see. What else have we talked about? We've hit all the major bits here. I mean, we'll talk about the depth charges. She does have them out to 10 kilometers. That's typical of battleships in this era of World of Warships. Let's go have a quick look at consumables, just so that we know what we're getting into here. Shipping World of Warships, she gets a damage control party. Standard battleship heal, 4 charges. And then she does get a fighter consumable. I'm sorry, this fighter consumable is not really worth it right now. and that's all she's stuck with. She cannot take a spotter plane. You do have a couple of charges of the engine cooling on the dive bomber squadrons, whereas I believe I think the carriers get 3 charges of this. As a battleship, you only get a couple, but it does mean that there are going to be times that you can speed these planes out there and then use the engine cooling thing and keep the speedy going. So yeah, guys, that's a look around Nebraska. I didn't get into DPM because with this few barrels, even with the 27-second reload, she's not going to win any DPM races off her main battery, right? The trick with the hybrid ships is managing your varying armaments against the targets you have in front of you and the strategic situation that the map, the mini map is kind of telling you, right? If you're on a flank and there's a lot of cruisers in front of you or a couple of battleships, like chances are you're probably going to stick to firing your main battery most of the time. And then as targets start to thin out or things get low, maybe you see somebody use their, see an opposing battleship, he's getting low, he uses damage control. Hey, maybe then it's time to pop the planes and go try to light some fires on somebody. But yeah, there's our first look at Tier VIII American Battleship USS Nebraska. We'll continue this look at the rest of the line later this week with Delaware and Louisiana, so I hope you'll come back. Wash your hands, be safe, and I'll see you then.